Hey, how's it going everyone? For a while now, I have been seeing a lot of discourse over the lightspeed meta of One Piece. I've seen a lot of claims that the verse isn't lightspeed, it caps out at lightspeed, or that it can never reach lightspeed, and I obviously disagree. If you ask me, One Piece has one of the most consistent lightspeed metas in shonen, and today we're gonna go over it in its entirety. Before we begin, I'd like to plug my Discord server, which you can join by becoming a channel member, or by joining my Ko-Fi. Our community is slowly growing, and if you'd like to learn about power scaling, or simply talk about your favorite verses, then you might want to consider joining. Now, the first thing I want to make clear is that power scaling is all about interpretation. How you reach a conclusion on a specific feat or statement may differ from the conclusion someone else reaches when looking at the same piece of evidence. However, with interpretation also comes the term context. Making a claim or reaching a conclusion may also be misinformed if you don't know the context behind it. A lot of claims about the One Piece verse not being faster than light lack a ton of context and ignore a large amount of evidence. To be fair though, One Piece is a long story, so I wouldn't necessarily say that many people are being disingenuous when they downplay the speed of the verse, but I do think that they lack the proper context. I'm only going to talk about the lightspeed meta of One Piece. I won't be going over the entirety of the speed meta since I don't think it's necessary, and I also won't go out of my way to quantify how fast they really are since it isn't the point of the video. I'll also be going over some specific debunks that I often see that definitely lack context. Finally, if your biggest complaint about the One Piece lightspeed meta, or the general lightspeed meta of most series, is that no character can realistically reach the speed of light because it's not logically or physically possible, I've already made a video that tackles that specific topic. The TLDR is that this is fiction, and fiction doesn't need to follow real-world physics or logic. So with all that out of the way, let's begin. If you've watched any of my more recent content, you may have heard me say that the One Piece lightspeed meta can technically start at any of these 4 arcs. It may be surprising to some of you that the earliest point in the timeline where one can argue that the Straw Hats start to enter the realm of lightspeed begins all the way back in Skypiea. Around the latter half of the story, the Straw Hats and the warriors of Skypiea run into Enel, who ate the Rumble fruit, which turned him into a lightning man. While fighting them, Enel blocks Wiper's attack using his lightning, and Nami states that she heard thunder, which meant he could expand the air at the speed of light. There aren't any more statements in this arc that reference the speed of light, but a few arcs later in an SBS, the author of One Piece Eiichiro Oda was asked by a fan, "What should one do if Enel shot down lightning bolts?" Oda replied, "First, guard yourself by ducking at light speed, then give him that golden right with a bit of rotation." This direct statement from the author has obvious implications in regards to the lightspeed meta because if taken into consideration, it could mean that in order to dodge Enel's lightning, Usopp, Nami, Sanji, and Luffy would have to have lightspeed reaction time. Most counter-arguments that I have seen for this boil down to Oda is obviously joking around, he's not being serious, therefore the statement shouldn't be taken seriously. Honestly, I disagree with this take only because it doesn't matter if Oda is being serious or not. There are plenty of SBS answers where he clearly isn't taking the question seriously, but it doesn't make the answer any less canon to the story. Another example is his response about the lines covering Robin's breasts when she's using her Gigante Fleur, which he claims aren't breasts but in fact onions. Whether or not he's talking about Kaido's club, Hawkins' eyebrows, or Robin's large onions, the simple fact is that these statements are canon to the story. Now, if I had to give you my personal take, I don't necessarily think that the Enel statement means that the Straw Hats are lightspeed by this point in time. The statement also references hitting Enel with that golden right with a bit of rotation, which is a reference to Luffy's golden rifle which he used to finish off Enel. If anything, I would argue that Luffy's reaction time at the very least is starting to border on relativistic, but like I always say, do with this information what you will. In the following arc, Luffy and the crew run into Foxy the Pirate. This absolute freak ate the slow fruit, which allows his body to produce slowpoke photons which slow down anything they touch, be it living creature, liquid, or gas. The slow beam Foxy can shoot is constantly referenced as light. I don't know how much more clear-cut this could possibly be, since it's referenced as light a total of 3 times, and Luffy does dodge the attack a few times himself, but the usual counter-arguments I see for this are that the photons that Foxy emit aren't actually photons, or the light he emits isn't light speed because they're made from slowpoke photons. Now, both of these counter-arguments are baseless. There are no statements in any of the pages throughout Long Ring Long that imply any of this. They are called light, they are never stated to move slower than light, and in reference to the slowpoke photon, Foxy explains how the ability works and then gives a demonstration. Whatever this light strikes, whether it's a living creature, liquid, or gas, will maintain all its other properties but lose velocity. He basically says this 3 times, so this undiscovered particle isn't slower than any other light particles, it simply makes anything it touches lose velocity. Throughout his fight with Foxy, Luffy does get tagged quite a few times. A lot of these hits came down to Foxy tricking or outsmarting him, but Luffy does display the capacity to dodge these light beams even when reflecting off of a mirror, which means he has to have relativistic reaction time and movement speed in order to avoid them. Moving on to Water 7 in Enies Lobby, Luffy fights CP9, and during their first meeting, he gets absolutely dumpstered. This arc does not have any light speed scaling as far as statements go, but now that we've established that Luffy should have relativistic reaction time due to his fight with Foxy, it is possible to argue that he's at the very least high-end relativistic to light speed by the end of Enies Lobby. He got blitzed by Rob Lucci and Bluno on multiple occasions when they first met. Not only did he get blitzed, but he couldn't even hurt them. By the time he gets his rematch a couple of hours later with Bluno, Luffy made up the difference in strength and speed in base. Even while using the shave ability, which previously blitzed Luffy, Bluno can't hit him. Barring the use of his Door Fruit, which Luffy wasn't prepared for, Bluno failed to land a decent hit the entire time, and when Luffy finally reveals second gear, which is a 10 times amp to his speed and power, the fight becomes a one-sided curb stomp. I want to take a quick side tangent and talk about the One Piece Yellow Databook statement. Just because it is in French doesn't mean it isn't canon. The original Japanese translation says extraordinary speed and power, instead of his power increasing tenfold. Neither of these statements contradict one another, and both translations are still canon, just like the Dragon Ball databook El Manga Legendario, which is entirely written in Spanish. This databook being translated in another language doesn't stop it from being canon. If you're gonna tell me that it still doesn't count, then go cope and cry about it. Anyway, regardless of whatever tier of speed you think Luffy's at by this point in time, he now has access to a form that gives him a 10 times amp to his speed, which will be important for later. There really isn't a lot to talk about when it comes to Thriller Bark besides the end of the arc when we meet Bartholomew Kuma. Kuma has the Paw Fruit, which allows him to repel anything he touches, including flying slashes, someone's pain and fatigue, and his own memories. The most important thing that he can repel, at least within the context of this video, is the air itself, which he can send at his opponents in the form of a shockwave at the speed of light. Not only does he state that he can repel the air at the speed of light, but he also fires a barrage of this attack at Zoro, and Zoro dodges it. This is a light speed feat. There is no other way of looking at it. It is a barrage of light speed attacks, and Zoro evades every single one of them while closing the distance between Kuma and himself. But if for some reason you are still not convinced, Kuma charges up a beam of light and fires it at Zoro while he's on his knees, and Zoro still dodges it. I'll repeat myself. Zoro is on his knees, he moves after the beam was fired and is already traveling through the air, and he dodges it. This is a faster than light feat. There is no way Zoro could dodge a beam of light already traveling his way without moving faster than the beam. If you're not convinced that the beam of light Kuma fired is an actual beam of light, then fret not, because in the very next arc, Sabaody Archipelago, Luffy punches a celestial dragon and gets an admiral called upon him. The Marines unveiled their newest cyborg weapons, the Pacifista, which are clones of Bartholomew Kuma. Vegapunk, the smartest man in the verse, was capable of reproducing Kizaru's ability to create beams of light. There is an entire panel that clarifies that by beam, they meant a ray of light. For those of you that may not know, Kizaru is one of the Marine admirals and a man who ate the light fruit. There is a massive misconception about Kizaru, which I will talk about later in the debunks section. There are plenty of feats to talk about in this part alone, including Luffy dodging one of the pacifista beams in base, and alongside Zoro and Sanji, the monster trio evade multiple beams of light fired in their direction on their way to tag the pacifista. The anime adaptation makes this even more evident that they were able to dodge these beams of light on their way to hit it. One more important thing to note for later is that Luffy has a short clash with Sentomaru, who absolutely bullies him and reacts to his Gum Gum Gatling. I could also talk about Rayleigh here, but I first need to debunk some stuff about Kizaru, which again I will do later. There isn't much to talk about in the following arcs besides Luffy's encounter with the Boa sisters, which I will mention when I talk about Haki. During the Paramount War, there are quite a number of Lightspeed 2 FTL feats, including Marco the Phoenix jumping in front of Whitebeard as a barrage of light beams from Kizaru were already fired, followed by him tagging Kizaru. Speaking of Kizaru, he shoots a beam of light at Luffy, and Ivankov blows Luffy away with a death wink in order to avoid it. Eva dodges a barrage of beams from Kuma. Luffy alongside Eva dodge a pacifista beam that was already fired. Eva moves their face so fast that they make a ton of after images and proceeds to blast Kuma with a galaxy wink that Kuma couldn't react to. And finally, Luffy, while using second gear, which again is a 10 times amp to his already FTL movement speed, attempts to speed blitz his way past the admirals, only to get blitzed right back by Kizaru, who says he's too slow. Shut up, I will get to it. There are plenty more feats I could talk about, like Luffy being kicked away again by Kizaru and Whitebeard catching him, Whitebeard stopping Kizaru from advancing towards Luffy, and Luffy dodging another beam of light after receiving a second hormone injection from Eva, even though his body was way past its limits. I think you get the point by now, and the craziest part is that all of these feats and statements come from the pre-timeskip era. We went from barely dodging a beam of light that slows down anything it touches to consistently dodging and reacting to beams of literal light, even while physically exhausted. So let's just move along to the post-timeskip. The first thing Luffy does right out of his 2 years of training is casually dodging a pacifista beam while carrying a large backpack full of food and clothes, and then casually dodging 3 pacifista beams without even looking. He even calls them slow. Even though I don't think I need to explain as to why this is easily a lightspeed feat, especially after providing all of that prior evidence, I know there are some people that are going to cope and say Luffy aim dodged or he used observation haki, therefore it isn't a lightspeed feat. This is one of those arguments that I said lack a ton of context. For those of you that don't read One Piece or may have forgotten, observation haki, for as powerful of an ability as it may be, is only relative to one's own speed. When Luffy fought the Boa sisters back in Amazon Lily, one of the sisters, Sandersonia, specialized in observation haki. Based on his intent, she could easily predict what his next attack was going to be and could casually read and dodge his moves. Once Luffy gets serious and uses second gear, she says it herself. She can read his moves, but she cannot hit him or keep up with him. This same rule applies to Future Sight. After learning how to see into the future through advanced observation haki in his fight against Katakuri, Luffy started to apply Future Sight more and more in his battles, especially while training in Udon Prison. During his rematch with Kaido on the rooftop, he got blitzed by Kaido even though he knew exactly what Kaido was going to do. Both the normal and advanced applications of observation haki are entirely reliant on the user's speed. So any arguments regarding Luffy getting tagged by a character doesn't mean that he's slow, it means that they are faster than he is to such a massive extent that he cannot physically keep up. Moving back to Sabaody, even if you wanted to lowball Luffy and say that he's no faster than his second gear self from the pre-timeskip, that would still mean that Luffy on a lowball is over 10 times faster than Light in his base form. Like I said, I'm not going to try and quantify the actual lightspeed meta, but this is just a baseline. However, I do want to add that after this point in time, the number of lightspeed statements and feats start to become less apparent since we've already surpassed that hurdle. In later arcs like Dressrosa, Luffy fights opponents like Doflamingo who are so fast that he gets consistently tagged even through his observation haki. Dofi can dodge Luffy's second gear attacks and blitz him right back. His attacks also force Luffy to dodge with more agency than the pacifista from Sabaody, who should be at a relatively closer distance while shooting its beams. Luffy has to use Gear 4, which provides an amp that pushes his body several times beyond his limits and hard blitzes Dofi in both the anime and manga from across a city. I constantly see the same argument about Gear 4 not providing a speed amp because Doffy landed one hit on Luffy while evading his Gum Gum Culverin, but when one simply applies the context of the fight scene, one can see that Luffy A. doesn't need to dodge Doffy since his body is too tough for Doffy's attack to deal any damage, and B. whenever Luffy uses Culverin or Jet Culverin, he stays in a stationary position and he still hits Doffy afterwards. Later in Whole Cake Island, we are introduced to Sanji's brothers who wear raid suits that improve their combat prowess, which allows them to travel at light speed. Granted, the statement is anime only, but considering that it's an added line in a canon arc, I don't think it stops it from being canon. Regardless, Sanji's brother, Ichiji, was capable of blitzing Oven, one of Big Mom's older sons, while using his Sparking Valkyrie. This attack shows that he outspeeds his own lasers, which trail behind him. His other brother, Niji, has an attack he calls Light Speed Blade Henry Blazer. I know the page implies that Sanji is moving slower than his brothers, but keep in mind that prior to these feats, Sanji was capable of blitzing Oven from a distance when Oven went in to punch his ex-stepfather Pound. He moved so fast that he could hit Oven, save Chiffon, and get back to the cake carriage before anyone could tell what happened. Luffy also develops a speed form called Snake Man that utilizes his newly acquired Future Sight and even greater attack speed than Bounce Man in order to fight Big Mom's strongest son, Katakuri, who throughout this fight constantly manhandled Luffy. For reference, Luffy, even while using Gear 4 Bounce Man, couldn't land a hit on Katakuri after he regained his composure, and yet after mastering Future Sight, Luffy could still only barely dodge and keep up with Katakuri. Now, remember when Luffy said the beams the Pacifista shot were slow? When he first meets Kaido and goes all out, even utilizing Gear 4 to try and put the Yonko down, Kaido gets up and both blitzes and one-shots Luffy. This faster-than-light Luffy, who's been getting stronger and stronger throughout the entirety of the post-timeskip saga while using a form that amps his body several times beyond his limits, got blitzed in an instant by Kaido. Luffy trains, improves his Future Sight, and learns a whole new advanced application of armament hockey in order to fight Kaido. After landing his first Red Rock by the time of the rooftop fight, Luffy sees an attack incoming from Kaido through Future Sight and he still gets tagged. At the start of the saga, he calls beams of light slow, and while looking into the future and knowing exactly what Kaido is going to do, he not only gets hit, but he also says verbatim, "It's too fast. Base Kaido is too fast." Listen, I could sit here and also talk about Chopper dodging Queen's black coffee beam at close range, Sanji perception blitzing Queen without Ifrit Jambe after unlocking his cyborg enhancements, or the fact that if you use the anime version of Gear 5 Luffy vs Kaido, Luffy moves so fast he can use bolts of lightning as trampolines in order to hurt Kaido before the lightning bolts dissipate. But I don't think it's necessary because the overwhelming amount of evidence that I've provided in order to just prove that the One Piece verse is faster than light should speak for itself. I think it's a good time to transition into the debunks that people try to use in order to prove that the One Piece lightspeed meta is either inconsistent or non-existent. In Wano, there is a character called Gazelleman who states that he can run at 200 kilometers an hour. Without context, this statement has been used to try and deny any lightspeed scaling in the story because according to some people, Zoro and Luffy couldn't catch up to him. It's not that they couldn't catch up to him, more so that they were being distracted by Batman when Gazelleman took Tama. One of the issues with making characters extremely powerful within the context of your story is that certain situations become non-issues if the character is either too fast or too strong. Oda, as a writer, has made it clear that while he can write extremely consistent power scaling, he's also going to put the story before any real-world logic that someone would like to apply. Why didn't Luffy and Zoro immediately blitz Gazelleman? Because if they did, then the story wouldn't move along. Because Gazelleman took Tama, Luffy and Zoro went to Bakura Town, defeated the headliner and Yokozuna, and stole all of the food they were going to eat in order to feed the people of Okobore Town. The ruckus they caused also got them the attention of Law, who would eventually reunite Luffy with his crew, and this would all lead to his first fight against Kaido. This is why context is important when one is power scaling. Without said context, one can make either misinformed or disingenuous claims. But let's just say for a moment that you are not convinced it was a story-related reason as to why they didn't blitz Gazelleman. The hierarchy of Kaido's crew is structured through strength. The stronger the pirate, the higher the position they will get in the crew. Gazelleman is a gifter, which means he got a smile fruit, and he works directly under a headliner named Hold'em. 2 chapters after Gazelleman takes Tama, Luffy fights his stronger superior and not only blitzes him to the point he didn't even know Luffy had taken Tama out of his lion stomach, but he gets immediately blitzed and one-shot right afterwards. The second debunk I need to talk about is in regards to Scratchman Apoo. For context, Apoo ate the Tone fruit, which attacks the enemies through the use of sound. During the raid on Onigashima, Apoo both attacked and damaged both Luffy and Zoro with his Devil Fruit, which resulted in some people believing that if Luffy and Zoro could get hit with a sound-based attack, then they certainly can't be Lightspeed. Now let's look at the context of the situation. When he first tags Luffy, it's obvious that Luffy is focused on the random beast pirate thugs, so it's an off-guard hit. When he tags Zoro clearly states that he doesn't have a blade and he didn't see the trajectory of his attack. I don't think I need to explain why One Piece characters can't see sound. Luffy and Zoro have never fought Apoo. Furthermore, they don't know the mechanics behind his abilities. After he gets smashed by Kid's Punk Gibson, he attempts to attack the Worst Generation members while they're arguing, and Killer tells them to cover their ears, completely negating his powers. He goes on to explain that Apoo's attacks carry anywhere in hearing range. If you hear it, there's no avoiding it, which is great for sneaking attacks. Between the way that he catches both Luffy and Zoro off guard and Killer's statement, it's blatantly obvious that this isn't an anti-feat in the slightest bit. As you can clearly see, these were never debunks in the first place. In my opinion, they were just poor attempts at trying to discredit the One Piece Lightspeed meta by people that clearly don't read the series. It's crazy how a tiny bit of context can completely destroy these poor lines of logic. But now that we've gotten them out of the way, we finally need to talk about Kizaru. As I mentioned before, Kizaru ate the light fruit and became a light man. Every single argument that I have seen regarding this character usually boils down to the following line of logic. If Kizaru is a light man, then his top speed is light speed. He cannot move faster than light, therefore the rest of the verse cannot move faster than light since he is one of the fastest characters. If you genuinely follow this line of logic because either you don't read the series or you don't like the series, then I can understand why the lightspeed scaling of the verse may seem inconsistent. However, this line of logic is extremely flawed and it doesn't take into account the context or logic of the series. To make a claim or to follow a specific line of logic, one needs to have some kind of supporting evidence in order for it to be even remotely viable. What evidence within the entire One Piece canon proves Kizaru can't move faster than light? This question alone destroys this entire line of logic because within the context of the story, be it statements, feats, or narrative, there is irrefutable proof that not only Kizaru, but a decent portion of the cast have the capability to fight, react, and move at faster than light speeds. It's easy to say this, but now let's prove it. For starters, if Kizaru ate the light fruit, then that means he becomes light and gains its properties among other abilities. It doesn't make any sense for his speed to cap out at the speed of light. If anything, his base speed upon eating the fruit would be light speed. Devil Fruit users can usually grow stronger alongside their fruit. Like Luffy or any other Devil Fruit user who have shown clear improvements with their abilities, Kizaru is no exception to this. There is no statement within the entire context of the canon that implies he can't move faster than the initial speed his Devil Fruit would naturally grant. Quick side tangent, if you're stuck on the fact that a man who ate a fruit that turned him into light shouldn't logically move faster than light, the main protagonist can do this. And he rides on a ship with a talking reindeer, a walking skeleton, a cyborg, and a fishman over a rainbow. Stop thinking about things in terms of real-world logic and instead consider the logic of the story. Now, I am aware that trying to rationalize this isn't enough for some folks, so let's actually support this claim with evidence. During his assault on Egghead, Kizaru gets stopped by the newly crowned Yonko Luffy, who finally gets to have his salty rematch after the absolute disrespect he faced back in Marineford. The first thing we see in this fight is Luffy already using Gear 4 Snake Man in order to fight Kizaru. The already FTL Luffy that can see into the future is using a transformation that pushes his body several times beyond its limits, which primarily focuses on raw speed and is fighting on par with Kizaru. Not only does he dodge one of Luffy's attacks, but he backs up so far away that Luffy can no longer see him. He follows that up by stating, acceleration is power, and the light he produces as he travels is visibly shown increasing in output as he blitzes Snake Man Luffy. Remember what I said about Kaido being too fast? Kizaru then appears in the middle of a room filled with the Straw Hats, who should all have at least FTL reaction time, considering that they've also been growing stronger as the series has progressed, and no one noticed his arrival until he spoke. Luffy then grabs Kizaru in a massive surprise to everyone after having to climb back up to the Labo phase, which meant he needed to pass the laser barrier twice. The laser barrier is a defense system that automatically attacks anyone who touches the lines with a laser. Luffy had to cross it twice, once when he got kicked away by Kizaru, and the second time when he had to travel all the way back up. Their fight boils down to a couple of FTL feats, such as Kizaru returning to Egghead in an instant once again after Luffy yeets him out of the island. He makes several clones that chase Luffy, which he outruns and takes down in an instant. My favorite feat is where he shoots a beam of light at Vegapunk, who's trying to escape, and Luffy, who is above and away from the doctor, swoops right in and eats the beam of light after it's been fired. Kizaru runs away from Luffy in order to complete his mission, and Luffy catches up to him and puts him down in a single star punch. There's also Luffy dodging a point-blank attack from Kizaru and Saturn, which he then retaliates by smashing them together into pancakes. There's one last thing I need to talk about, and it's the massive misconception about the Volume 110 SBS Lightspeed statement from Oda. I have seen people use this reply in order to argue that the verse caps out at lightspeed. The question reads, in chapter 1103, Luffy is so hungry he can't move, but in chapter 1106, he is full. Who gave Luffy food? Oda replies, in chapter 1103, he suddenly starts eating. Who on earth responded to Luffy's plea for meat? Was it Sanji or Frankie who were nearby? Kizaru and Sentomaru were there too. It seems like nobody found out. In other words, their actions went unnoticed, like it was done at the speed of light. This is obviously alluding to the culprit being Kizaru. I personally find it funny that people use this SBS to discredit the One Piece Lightspeed meta when they have an immediate reference for the chapter itself that easily explains the situation. Let's take a look. The chapter shows Luffy lying on the ground, and 3 pages later he's eating food. The line of logic that attempts to discredit this essentially boils down to Kizaru perception blitzed everyone in his vicinity in order to get Luffy food. Since he did it at light speed, some people use this to assume that the speed of light is so fast no one can see when he did it. If you look at the image, everyone present isn't looking at Luffy or Kizaru. No one is focusing on either character besides Atlas, who glances at Luffy prior to the feat. The following 3 pages don't show anyone focusing on Luffy or even remotely looking in his direction, and the next time he's on panel, you can see him eating. It obviously happened off screen, and the fact that there wasn't a single person looking his way is definitive proof that this line of logic is at best misinformed, since it lacks the proper context and at worst disingenuous. I think you all get the point by now. One Piece has a definitive and consistent FTL meta. There are no ifs, ands, or buts. There are plenty more examples I could talk about, like Sentomaru getting blitzed by both awakened Lucci and Kizaru even though he could casually tag and beat Sabaody Luffy, who had lightspeed feats, or Rayleigh stopping Kizaru's attempt at unaliving Zoro even though he's a retired old man with only haki. There are probably a few more examples I missed that someone will bring up in the comments. If, after watching this entire video, you still don't believe that the series has an FTL meta, then I don't know what else to tell you. The series has an abundance of statements and feats that won't be debunked by any singular argument that likely lacks context. I feel like after a certain point, one just has to look at things objectively and ask themselves, is the series really not Lightspeed, or am I just being biased? But anyway, that's the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please like and share. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.